We're being recorded. Well, welcome everybody to the South Sound Story Guild, and we appreciate everybody's attendance, both virtually and live and in person. So we've got a pretty good lineup tonight of storytellers. We've got an opening teller, Steph Palmer, and then our featured teller, who was very kind enough to not show up because she didn't want to share her cold, or I thought I'd hope for her to say maybe it's the flu. So thank you for continuing on to tell the story, and thank you for not sharing your flu with us. Appreciate that. So real quickly, for those folks that are on Zoom, if any of you would like to tell a story, please let us know here in the break. Let me know. You can either send a message via Zoom or chime in when we take a break, and then we'll work you into the rotation. And so how we usually do this during these sessions is we have an opening teller and a featured teller that take up most of the first part of the evening. Then we take a short break, and then we have folks who come in and for the story swap part of this, where they tell stories that they prepared, either the story that they're working on or something that they just want to share with the rest of the group. And right now we know that we have 3 of those, and so far three in-person people do that. So welcome, and with that, our first teller, our opening teller, is Steph Palmer. And Steph grew up here in the local area. He spent a career in the Air Force, where Steph and I met quite a long time ago and got to be good friends. And then he went on to apply for a major airline and came back home after the Air Force. And he's dug into local history, likes stories that have a local flavor to them, and enjoys that. And there's even a rumor that he applied for the space program, but that's yet to be verified. Some of the things we say here are true, and some of them you just got to verify. But anyway, so Steph has a story tonight, and the story is about farm animals. Why we do not name them. Steph.
Hey, Steph.
Thank you. So most of you know me, and those of you don't, I grew up out here in Mason County, in a rural area, little state park, along a beautiful river. And so when we were there, it was many years ago, in the 50s. And this story takes place when I was about 5 years old, so about 1951 or so, just to sort of set the scene. Now, back then, things were a lot different. In the state park, we were able to do things that folks were that you wouldn't be able to do today. For example, we had cows that ran through the park in the wintertime. In the summer, we sent them off to the field. I had horses, had donkeys, dogs of all kinds, cats, all sorts of things. But what I didn't have was chickens. So the story tonight is based on my chickens. So it's sort of a chicken story tonight. So, like I said, we had a lot of space there, and running the park was sort of like running a little family bed and breakfast business. We had picnickers down by the house, and they would come up to the house because that was the headquarters, and we had campers in the park. So I had a lot of animals, but one thing I didn't have were chickens, as I mentioned. And down the road, right next to the park, was an older man who was crippled up in a train accident. He liked to hang out with my dad when he was working. And I thought old Mr. Chet Nuxel was quite the man. I mean, Mr. Nuxel was so good. I mean, he liked me, and I really liked him. I mean, he could carve wood, play the harmonica out of both sides of his mouth. And he told some wonderful stories about actually shapeshifters and ghosts and a lot of things like that. So if I ever had a question, I went to Mr. Nuxel. Now, Mr. Nuxel, I like to go over to his place because he had a chicken coop with all sorts of chickens running around it. I love those animals. Now, the kind he had were called bantam chickens. When you go to the fairgrounds, you know, you go into the chicken display, they don't have those white chickens you see on the trucks going to the slaughterhouse that are going to be $5 Costco chickens, right? And they're not the chickens that give those little pasty white eggs either. These were bantam chickens, and they were beautiful things. So I used to go over there and I would throw them corn, and he'd let me feed them. Man, I love those chickens. Well, one day, Mr. Nuxel sort of did things on his own. There are other stories about that. I'm sure he didn't ask my dad's permission because he showed up with 3 chickens for me. And once I had them, those chickens belonged to me. The first one was a bantam rooster. I mean, he was the real cock of the walk. When he walked, everybody looked at him. And his tail was arched up. He had a wattle on top that was bright red, big jowl wattles also. And he crowed so beautifully. I love that rooster. And the other one were two little diminutive hens. One is kind of a cinnamon colored and one is kind of a blue color. Now the cinnamon colored hen and the rooster, they were kind of close. So being a kid and not knowing about polygamy with animals, I sort of figured, well, I would name them Mr. Peewee and Mrs. Peewee. Now the little blue hen over here, kind of by herself, she was sort of a spinster, you might say. So I called her Aunt Bluebell. So I had Mr. Peewee, Mrs. Peewee, and Aunt Bluebell. And Mr. Peewee being a rooster, normally those things are kind of mean, right? But he was so good to me. I mean, I could pick him up, carry him under my arm, got pictures still of him on his shoulder, riding on top of my head, and being very polite too while I did it. And those chickens were great. I loved them, and the people picnicking in the park, again, this is many years ago, when you could get by with this type of thing. My chickens would go down into the park, whenever there were picnickers there, they'd run down, get under the table, and they always like to pick at little droppings that people would leave from, right? So that everything was going along smoothly. Well, bad things sometimes happen when you take a nap and you're a kid, right? So one day I'm taking a nap, my dad goes out to check on things, and he sees Mr. Peewee and Aunt Bluebell, but Mrs. Peewee isn't around. He's looking around because they tend to really came together close. And he finally found her back in the bushes. He saw this little cinnamon group of feathers. He went back and looked, and there was Mrs. Peewee on a big pile of eggs in a nest. And she was as dead as a doornail. Boom. He picked her up. There were 19 eggs there. And she must have just put all of her motherly effort into those eggs. And she was gone. So Pot, being a great guy, thinks, well, I'm going to have to do something about this before Stet wakes up. So he grabs Mrs. Peewee, he runs down to see Chet. He goes, Chet, we got a problem, and we've got to fix it. So they go into the hen house, the chicken coop. And of course, Chet had all sorts of chickens there. And so they start going through the little cinnamon colored hens. Here's the dead one, here's a live one. They're about the same. The color looks great and everything. So out goes the dead one. Pop runs home with the live one, puts her on the nest, and she's broody, and she goes, I like these eggs. I'm gonna take care of these eggs. So I come down from the nap, and he thinks everything's good. So I got looking for my chickens. And I finally found all three of them. I see Mrs. Peewee on the nest, all these eggs. I go running back in the house all excited, going, Mom, Dad, I found Mrs. Peewee. She's sitting on a bunch of eggs. And the funny thing is, her neck is longer now than it was before. So anyway, great observation, but I'm a little bit dense on at that point. Well, Mrs. Peewee, the new Mrs. Peewee, second wife, winds up sitting on all those 19 eggs, and every darn one of those eggs hatches. So we've got names for all of our animals. There's, Thunder the horse, Pedro the donkey, Chiquita and Cherry, and Lucky the dog, and Old Hound dog, and Mike my dog. So I got to come up with names for these 19 chickens, right? And Dad goes, you can't find 19 names for these chickens. So we called them the kindergarten class. Well, they would follow Mr. and Mrs. Peewee around all the time. So now when the picnickers came into the park, all 22 chickens were running down there under the table, up on the benches and up on the top. And Dad took me aside. He goes, we need to talk about something. He goes, we live in the country and we eat animals for food. And we've got 19 of those chickens. So we really need to do something about it, before somebody complains. So I understood this was okay. Yep. And get the seal of approval. I know it's going to happen. Well, I went and took him. This was in this because I finished the nap. I'm running down, all excited. I go out past the woodshed. What do I see? I see these beautiful tail feathers on the ground. Then I see cinnamon colored tail feathers on the ground. And then all of a sudden I'm going, and Bluebell! Because Dad said he wished he could have glued the heads back on those chickens. He had gone out and chopped heads off all 22 chickens.
Oh,
I still love him, and I've forgiven him many years years later, but anyway, that taught me a lesson about you don't give names to your farm animals, right? Because someday you eat them. So I've learned my lesson, right? And today I do so much better. So we've got horses where we live. Now, if we were going to go on a trip, we could get a horse sitter, right? But what did we do a few years ago? We got chickens. So we've got 3 older ones. And the last of things, I don't think they're going to lay an egg anymore in their life. We've got Cinnamon, we've got Andy, we've got Lacey. And then this spring, my wife decided, oh, look at those little chicks at the hardware store. So we got 3 more, and Baby and a Blue, and then Chicky, which turned into a chicken. So I got her to a farm where somebody said, yeah, we'd like the rooster. And she said, I'm going to give you 2 more small hens. So I got Rusty and Red. So now I have 7 chickens with names. Now you're not going to be able to take 7 chickens to a boarding family. All right. So we're kind of stuck with these 7 chickens. And, you know, they're past the point. I butchered a lot of chickens, but these things are going to die of old age. And somebody tells me they live for, what, 10 years, something like that. So would anybody like some chickens? I think, see, I don't know if we got time for, oh yeah, let's see. I don't want to cut into Elizabeth's time here. So you might say that the story ends there, but we had some cattle too. So I had a, Patsy was my cow, and every year she'd have a calf. And I understood that, you know, when it got bigger, that it's going to go down to old Mr. Hensler's slaughterhouse and be slaughtered. But my dad was real good because every year he took that calf down there, the young steer down there, and he would always trade it to old Joe Hensler to go out into the cooler room, and he'd swap it so we weren't eating our own steer, right? So this, I thought, was really great. One year, I didn't realize, again, not very perceptive, that my dad, everything was always grass-fed, but this year, he decided he was going to grain feed this steer. I didn't know why. So he pumps all of this money, all of this grain into feeding this steer, you know. So finally, we wave goodbye to the steer one day, gets on the truck and hauled off. And later, after everything's cut up and put into the freezing lockers down at Brady, we finally bring home some meat. My mom's going to cook, and it's going to be that year's meat. And so she pulls it out and cooks a beautiful dinner. And we sit there, the whole family, 3 adults and 2 of us kids, and we're eating this meat, and it's tough food. Horse leather, you know, we're really trying to cut through that stuff. And finally, I'm saying to my dad, you know, man, this is really tough. Did old Mr. Hensler give you some old dairy cow switch for the steer for Billy? And my dad never would lie. Just his head went down low and he kept cutting. Finally, I realized I'm going, Billy. So anyway, that's my last experience of naming a farm animal. So, you know, the horses can be named and the dogs can be named, and most of the cats can be named too. But beyond that, the pigs and the chickens, and the cows, you know, don't give them any. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Seth. That's some stuff you don't learn in school about the managing farm animals and life in the country. So don't name your farm animals. You'll have to remember that. Well, next up is our featured teller, Elizabeth Lord. Elizabeth developed an interest in storytelling during high school. And then when she went to the Evergreen courses, she was a class on storytelling. And she really got into storytelling and even got a degree in it. So she was a member of the Southtown Story Guild back in the 90s, so probably one of the startup members. And she's started another group here in the community. She's a co-producer and a founder of Story Olin, which is a group that meets regularly here in the area. But she has quite a resume, and she's written and performed some solo shows. So she's taken her storytelling, blended it with a little bit of drama. One of them that I found was Vegas Childhood. And then she performed another solo story or solo performance last year that was a real delight that many of us had a chance to watch and watch her perform. Really enjoyable person and enjoyable storyteller. It's part of who she is. So we're very privileged to have her with us here tonight via Zoom to tell her story. So Elizabeth, with that, I'll turn the evening over to you.
All right. Hi.
Hey,
Hi, it's good to be here. I haven't been on Zoom in a long time. In fact, I told myself a few years ago that I would never do Zoom again. But I'm glad to have it tonight because I didn't want to pass on whatever it is that I have right now. So forgive me if I pause to get some water or cough or something like that. I'm doing my best here. It's really nice to see all of you. I can't see everyone that's in the room. I do see a nice warm fire though, so that feels pretty good, Yeah, so I have a couple stories for you tonight, time allowing. And I thought I'd start with a personal story. All right. Let's see, how old was I? Ah, yes. I was 21 years old. And I decided after the semester ended where I was attending college that I would just try to not live anywhere. I would just, stay with friends, or me and my sweetie would sleep in the back end of his 1965 Volvo wagon. Or I'd sneak back onto campus and sleep in those rooms attached to the ladies' rooms that were there for us to rest. I just thought that would be an okay thing to do, and I could save money that way too. I'd stashed all of my earthly possessions in a large garbage sack and tied it up and set it under the dorm unit that I used to live on in campus. That was my free storage for the summer. But I learned pretty quickly that going from house to house and living in cars that you constantly have to move was not pleasant at all. I really didn't care for it. And so when I learned through a friend of a friend that there was a room available in a house in West Olympia that only cost $150 a month to rent, I snatched it up. Yes. I went over to the house and I met the women that lived there, and it was a woman's only house. And that was fine. And I introduced myself and ingratiated myself. And they said, yes, I could move in for the summer. And that was fine. And I moved in and I went into my new bedroom and I closed the door, and it was mine. Oh, so exciting to have my own room. The first time I'd had my own room. Hadn't had it as a kid and had always shared a room in the dorms. Well, things went really well. I lived there a year, and then another year, and then another year. And as time went on, I had new roommates. There were 5 bedrooms in the house, and all of us were very interested in keeping the rent as cheap as possible. So there was one person in each of the bedrooms. Sometimes there were 2 people in one of the bedrooms. So I had a lot of roommates over a lot of years, and things went smoothly until one day one roommate said, I'm moving out. Oh, okay. Do you know if no, I don't have anyone to replace me. I'm moving out. And then someone else said they were moving out, until I found myself once again at the start of a summer with everyone telling me they were moving out. I was the newcomer, and now suddenly I was the person that had lived there the longest, and everyone was moving out, and I couldn't afford the whole rent myself. So I knew I'd have to move out and find a new place to live. And I contacted the landlord and I said, here is the situation. Everyone is moving out. and I can't afford the space on my own, and rent is due in a month and a half, and I'm going to have to move out. And he said, well, hold on. You've got a month and a half. Maybe you can find some people to fill the rooms. And I looked at him like, that's crazy. That's never going to happen. That's not enough time. He said, well, you try, and I'll make some calls too and see if I can find some people that might want to live there. All right. So I thought about it. Oh, yeah. My best girlfriend, she'd gotten a job working on cruise ships, smaller cruise lines that went up to Alaska and back. She'd work on the boats, and then she'd be off for the off-season period of time, collect unemployment, travel the world, and then she'd be back on the boats again. She was spending an awful lot of money paying rent where she was. Why not live with me? It's much cheaper, and she's rarely home. She'd be the perfect housemate. I asked her, she agreed. And then I found another person and another person and another, and I needed one more person. Well, wasn't going to find it in time. I let the landlord know, I don't think I can find enough people, but maybe we can make it go with just the four of us. And he said, hold on. I found you a housemate. Her name is Jean Marie. Jean Marie really needs a place to stay. She's a friend of the family, someone I've known since she was little. And she's only 19 years old. Would that be a problem? I said, no, that wouldn't be a problem. He's like, and she's 8 months pregnant. Would that be a problem? I said, well, no. I mean, we had established some rules in the household over time. We were all in our early 20s, and one of our rules was no children. I said, well, we're not prepared to share a house with an infant. He said, oh, no, she just needs a place to stay for the end of her pregnancy. You see, Jean Marie is preparing to give her child up for adoption. She's been working with a local couple that have been helping her through the process. They've been paying her medical bills. And so it's a friendly adoption that's taking place. She's decided she's too young to have a child of her own. And this couple really wanted a child of theirs. So she will be giving her child up for adoption when the baby is born. There will be no infant in your home. Oh, okay. Well, since my landlord was recommending the young woman move in, I didn't feel I could say no. And so within the week, Jean Marie moved in. Yes, she was very pregnant. Very pregnant indeed. In fact, she moved into the room that I had first lived in when I moved into the house. I showed her all around, and she waddled behind me like pregnant women do. And we got to know each other a bit. The first day, we made some food together, and then we had conversations, and I talked to her about how she felt about the pregnancy and the adoption, and she was absolutely, with conviction, solidly for it. No problems, no bones about it at all. Happy to do it. 1 week after she'd moved in, her new bed arrived. She'd ordered a new mattress for her bed frame. And the bed arrived, and she made it all up with her new sheets and blankets. And she called me into the room. She said, Elizabeth, try out my new bed. And I got on the bed, and it was crunchy. It made this crunchy sound. And I said, Jean Marie, I think you're supposed to take the plastic wrapping off the mattress before you put on the bedding. And she said, oh, no, that's on purpose. In case my water breaks, then the mattress will be protected. Right. In case the water breaks. Well, she was thinking. Well, a few more days passed, and all told, she'd been living with me about 2 weeks when I came home from work to find her in the kitchen talking on the phone. She was talking to my landlord's wife, who was her helper during this pregnancy. She saw me come in. She put her hand over the receiver and she said, "My water broke." And then she got back on the phone and kept talking. Uh, all I'd seen is movies. So I said, "Well, your water broke. There's some action we need to be taking. There is a state of things that need to happen. There's medical professionals to call. She said, "It's okay." I'm talking with uh, Faith, and she says I've got plenty of time. I decided to have something to eat because who knows what I'm going to eat next. And sure enough, she gets off the phone with Faith and she cooks herself a little meal. I'm looking around the house for puddles of water. I wonder, where did it happen on your mattress? I asked. She said, "No, but I was ready." I said, "Yes, you were ready." Well, in a couple hours, her friend comes by to take her to the hospital where she'll give birth. There at the hospital, she'll meet up with the adoptive parents to be, and she will give birth, and the child will be given to the new family. As they're packing her overnight bag and getting things ready, Jean Marie turns to me and she says, "Elizabeth, you asked if there's anything you could do." I said, "Yeah." She's like, "Do you think you could drive my car over to the hospital? If you could drive it over there, you could take the bus back, and that way my car will be in the parking lot so that when it's time for me to go, I'll have my car there." Sure, I say, "That's the least I can do." So she gives me her car keys, and I say goodbye to her and her friend, and they go off to the hospital to have a baby. I get the car keys, I eat something, and then I'm like, okay, I'll take her car over to the medical center. And so I get in her car and drive it over to the hospital and find a good parking spot and take note of where it's located so I can tell her where her car is out there. I go into the hospital and find her room, and she's in this lovely birthing room, and I come in and she's laboring. I finally understand this. Why they call it labor. Ooh, did not look good. It did not look pleasant at all. So I said, "Hi, Jean Marie. Hi. Here's your keys. I'll put them." And her friend Faith points to the little table where there's a drawer, and I put the keys in the drawer like a nightstand. And then she continues to help Jean Marie walk around the room. Apparently, walking is a good thing to do. So I say, "Well, I guess I'll be going," and I make my way towards the door, and Jean Marie stops me. She says, "Hey, Elizabeth, since you're here, could you do me another favor?" "Sure." "Would you go down the hall and let the parents know that everything's going all right?" I said, "The parents?" She said, "The people adopting the baby." Oh, yes, I'll do that. They're down the hall. She said, "Yes." So I exited the room and went down the hall and found the only two people that could have possibly been the prospective parents, because they were physically wringing their hands. They were pacing. They were so anxious, and they looking around, and I said, "Hi, are you?" And I don't remember their names, but I greeted them and they said, "Yes." I said, "Hi, I'm Elizabeth, Jean Marie's housemate. She wanted me to let you know that everything is going well. The labor is going well. She is however many inches or centimeters dilated. I didn't know at the time. And the birth is going along smoothly." "Oh, okay, thank you so much." And they got my name, and then we talked some more, and then I went back in the room to relay to Jean Marie that I had delivered the message, and then we chatted a little bit more, and then things moved very quickly. Suddenly, the nurse comes in to check Jean Marie. Boy, those nurses, they don't even worry about it. They just get right up in there. They get right up in your business. And they got right up in there and they're looking at Jean Marie, and I'm standing next to the nurse, and I am seeing things for the first time myself. And she says to Jean Marie, and she says to her friend, "It's time." And the midwife that they have selected to be part of this process comes into the room, and Jean Marie is on this bed, and they drop out the bottom part of the bed so that there's access. And then suddenly her feet are dangling in the wind, and Faith, her friend, takes a foot and puts it on her hip, puts it on her left hip as she's facing her, and she takes Jean Marie's hand. And Faith looks at me like, "What are you not doing?" And I look at Faith and I think, "What should I be doing?" And I take Jean Marie's other foot and I put it on my hip, and I take her hands, and I got her hands, and we are holding and supporting Jean Marie. And then the midwife says, "Push." And there, right before my eyes, Jean Marie's legs are thrust into our hips, and I am holding her hands, and she is using us for support, and we are all sweating, but none more than Jean Marie. And she gives birth right there. So, person come out of another person. For a time, it's like a two-headed person. But anyway, the whole child came out, and the baby is healthy, and they suck all the fluids out of it. And then the baby is fine. And does she want to hold the baby? They ask her. Because this is an adoption about to happen. And she says, yes. So they give her the child to hold. And then they send me out of the room to go talk to the prospective parents. So down the hall I go, and I tell them the baby has been born. The baby is healthy. It is a girl baby. It has 5 fingers and 5 toes. And the baby is quiet and sleeping right now. And everything is fine. And they give me a message to relay back to Jean Marie. And suddenly I am the telephone going back and forth between these parents and Jean Marie. And I don't understand how I'm qualified for this. I only met her 2 weeks ago. But there I am, reassuring the new parents that all is well, and reassuring Jean Marie that these people are good people, and that her daughter will be safe and happy and healthy with them. I tell Jean Marie where her car is in the parking lot. And then I leave, and I take the bus home. A few days later, Jean Marie comes home with the baby. She's not yet ready, she says. Not yet ready to give her child to them. They worked it out, she said. It's okay. She can be with the child for a little bit. It'll be okay. I said, and did you name her? She said, no. But can you do something for me, Elizabeth? Sure. Will you watch my baby? I have to go to the store. So there I was in this house full of young people, holding this newborn, the first time I had ever held a newborn. And this child would soon be gone. But I cared for the child for 2 hours. Jean Marie came back. Another few days passed, and then one morning, Jean Marie was gone. And so was her car, and so was the babe. She changed her mind and drove away to go live a new life as a new mom somewhere else. I'm so glad I moved into that house. I met so many people. But no one showed me more about the world than young Jean Marie. Thank you. Zoom is so strange. Everyone's on mute. Who knows? Who knows if you gasped or not? How much time do I have?
About an hour.
I have a whole other hour?
Oh, about 20 or 30 minutes. Take what you need.
Okay. Good. All right. Let me tell you another story. Would you like to hear another story?
Yeah.
Yay, voices. Cool. Okay. Excuse me. Once upon a time, there was a stonemason. A stonemason, a man that worked with stones and mortar to build things. And he was a good stonemason. He was very good at his job. But he only really ever had three ambitions in life. And that was to be as rich as the king, to have as much money as the king, and to marry the king's daughter. But he was a stonemason. So he decided to become a thief. By day, he continued his trade as a stonemason, and by night, he would go into the town and find what he could find, and he would steal it. He did this night after night, and eventually he became quite wealthy. No one suspected that he was the sly thief of Valencine because they thought he was just a very successful stonemason. Over time, he was able to hire more stonemasons to work with him. And in time, he became a master stonemason and then an architect. Still, most nights he went out to find what he could find and grow his wealth. Eventually, he moved to the big city, Paris. And there he established a shop as not only a stonemason, but an architect. A very, very successful architect. And one day he was strolling through the city and he walked past the king's palace. He looked at the king's palace and he thought, oh, I wish I had that palace. I wish I had the wealth in that palace. And he knew exactly where the treasure was, where the treasure room was. And it was attached right to the castle in this tower made of stone. So he looked at that tower and he knew from his trade that in every structure there is a weak spot. So in the cover of darkness, he went around the base of the tower, tapping on the stones until he heard a slightly different sound. Ah, this will be my entrance, he thought. The next night, he came back to the tower and he brought with him a wagon, many, many, many empty sacks, his stonemason tools, and a horse to pull that wagon. And he went up to the tower and he tapped and tapped and he found that stone again and he tapped some more and tapped and gave it a push and in it went into the tower. This led into a hallway. He crawled down this hallway, this tunnel, and there was another stone. He tapped, pushed, and in he went in to the treasure room. Oh, the king's treasure, full of jewels and gold and silver. Well, he had drug a sack with him and he filled the sack with all the jewels and he drug it back out and he did that over and over and over again and he worked through the night until he had mm, about half of the treasure in that room. He figured if he had half, he was now as rich as the king. He loaded up the wagon with all the sacks of jewels and gold and silver. And at that point, it was morning, and he rode past the guards at the castle gate, and they didn't even suspect him, for they thought he was a farmer on his way to market. The next morning, the king woke up. He went into his treasure room and he could not believe what he saw. So much of his treasure was gone. He coughed. And he turned to his wise men and he said, "How could this have happened? You told me that this room was built securely." "Oh, and it was, your highness." And the three wise men stroked their beards. "Well, what has happened? Who has stolen this treasure?" And they stroked their beards some more. "You must find out who is in this. We must search the city." And they stroked their beards and they said, "Oh, king, there's no way you're going to find a thief as clever as this. We'll have to come up with a better plan to catch this." They stroked their beards and they said, "King, we have come up with a plan." 3 plans, in fact. The first plan is this. You will hold a ball and you will invite all the wealthiest people of the city to the ball, and you will line the floor of the room with gold pieces so that it makes its own flooring. People will arrive and they will see the gold on the floor, but only a thief such as this person would dare to stoop to pick up a piece of gold off the floor. And we will be watching. We will have sentries posted all around the room. And when we see that person stoop to pick up a piece of gold, we will have our sly thief. The king was not so sure about this. Putting his gold out on the floor, he might lose even more of it. "Trust us," said the wise men. "We will find the thief." "All right," said the king. And the king decided that not only would they invite the wealthiest people of the city, but they would charge each person 10 florins to come in. Why not start generating wealth again? So they held the ball, and all of the finest people came, including the sly thief, the architect, everyone wearing their finery. And as they entered the hall, the gold was unmistakable underfoot. And the sly thief's eyes got wide. "Oh, this shall be mine." But how? How? He could see how closely watched it was. So he walked around the space and looked at the space and talked to the people and danced the dances. And then he came up with an idea. He took a sharp knife and cut a slit in the sole of his shoe. Then he picked up that shoe, showed it to the guard, and said, "Look, my shoe is in need of mending. I don't want to miss the rest of the ball. I'll just quickly slip out to a cobbler, have it mended, and be back." No, the guards shooed him off, no problem. He was a wealthy guest of the party. Of course, he may leave. And so he left and he went to the cobbler's house. Now, this is late at night. The cobbler is fast asleep, but he rattles the door and he throws rocks at the window, and the cobbler opens up and looks down and says, "Oh, it's you. You, of course, sir. How may I help you?" And so he lets him into his shop and he shows him the shoe and how it is broken. The cobbler examines the shoe and says, "How did you do this?" And the sly thief lies about how it was done. And he says, "Well, this will take some time. This will take me multiple days to fix this." "Never mind," says the thief. "Just take some tar and put it on the bottom of the shoes, and that should be enough to fix up this hole." "Okay," says the cobbler, and he stitches it a bit and puts some tar on it and hands him his shoes. And while the cobbler wasn't looking, the thief grabbed the container of shoe tar from the counter. Then the thief went back to the ball. He was let back in, and when in a dark corner, he put even more tar on the bottom of his shoes, and then he began to walk around and greet people and talk to people and have wine and dance. And as the party went on, the gold pieces started to disappear. Well, you see, they stuck fast to the bottom of his shoes, now with that sticky tar on the bottom. When no one was looking, he would sneak into a dark corner and remove the gold pieces and put them in his bag. And out he would stroll again, walking around, never, ever bending over. No, no, no. No one saw anyone bend over to pick up the gold, but for some reason, by the end of the night, all the gold was gone. Well, the king was incensed. "Oh, but this happened?" He called his wise men over. "You said you had a good plan." Well, we did have a good plan, but luckily that was just the first of our 3-point plan. Well, how are we to get this gold back, and how are we to catch this thief? It's simple. We will just have everyone who's here stay the night. "What?" says the king. "I don't have rooms enough to put up everyone for the night." "No, no, no. We'll just ask them to sleep on the floor. You're the king. They would do anything for you. Only you must warn them not to go into your daughter's room. We will leave the door of her room open, and only someone as sly as him would dare insult your daughter and go into her room. And when she does, she'll be ready." "Okay," said the king, "if you insist." So he makes the announcement, "You are all invited to be my guests tonight and sleep on the floor." And some people grumbled, but they weren't about to grumble out loud. And although the sly thief thought I'd be more comfortable in my own bed, he was much too curious to see what this was all about. The king said, "And before you go to sleep, I shall be sleeping in this chamber, and my daughter shall be in this chamber. Do not insult her by going into her room." Well, everyone went to sleep, but the sly thief, if unseen, was thinking about this daughter. The door was open, and everyone could see her preparing for her bed, and she was quite lovely indeed. So he couldn't resist. He couldn't. So once everyone was asleep, he goes creeping into her room. And when he gets in there, he says, "Princess, are you awake?" And she says, "I am." "Oh, princess, I'm only here," says the thief. "I'm only here to pay you compliments. From where I come from, your beauty is talked about far and wide." She says, "Oh," she's charmed. "Oh, you speak such kind words. Come closer so that I might give you a kiss in gratitude for your kind words." And so he does. He gets close to her, and she does exactly what the wise men had set her up to do. She takes a brush that has been prepared in ink that cannot be washed off, and she puts an X right on his forehead. Well, he receives the kiss and the mark on his forehead and bids her adieu and goes back out into the hall and falls asleep. Well, in the morning, he wakes before everyone else, and he goes into the washroom to clean himself up and looks into the mirror to see that he has this mark on his forehead. So he begins to scrub it off, but it won't come off. No amount of soap or water will get it off of his forehead. "Oh, I've been had for sure. They'll surely find me for sure. This will not do at all." He worries and he frets. What am I to do? What am I to do? And then he comes up with a plan. He creeps back into the princess's chambers, and she is now fast asleep. He finds the little pot of ink and the brush, and he takes them from her chambers, goes back into the ballroom, and puts an X on everyone's forehead. Everybody gets a mark. Some 2, some 3. The king, he put 3 X's on his forehead. By late morning, everyone's awake, and the king has everyone line up and walk past him so he may examine their forehead to see if they have the mark to prove that they've been insulted his daughter. They all march past the king, but the very first person to come up to him has the mark. And it's a 61-year-old man. "Oh, you went into my daughter's room." But then the next man has an X, and the next man has an X. Eventually, he goes into the bathroom and he sees that he has 3. He turns to his wise men, "I am sleepwalking at night. Luke, would you see this? I can't believe this." The wise men say, "Obviously, this thief is more clever than we had thought. Here's what we do. Tomorrow, you will announce that there will be another ball. You will invite everyone back. They will come back. And yes, they will come back and they will enjoy themselves. But before they do, we will dig a pit outside of your daughter's room and we will put a seesaw mechanism outside her door. So that when anyone who tries to go in her room, whiz bang into the pit they'll go, and then we will have them caught for sure. Okay. So it was done. The pit was dug, the seesaw trapdoor was in place, the announcements were made, everyone came back to the palace, a ball was held, there was music, there was dancing, there was food, there was wine, and once again the king invited everyone to stay the night, and they did, because he was the king, even though he had charged them 10 florins apiece again. They were warned once again not to insult his daughter, and everyone went to sleep. But the sly thief couldn't resist. And so he went back to her room and didn't know about the trapdoor. Whiz bang, in the pit he goes. Well, now I'm caught for sure. Oh my goodness. What shall I do? The walls were smooth. He couldn't climb out. Well, in that moment that he fell in the pit, it awakened the princess and she started to scream. And as she yelled for help, people got up and came running to her assistance. One by one, whiz bang, whiz bang, whiz bang, whiz bang, into the pit they all fell, one on top of another, until almost everyone that was there was in the pit. And as there was a great mob of people, the sly thief was able to crawl up over them and out of the pit, getting free. Well, in the morning, everyone was pulled out of the pit, and they were no closer to catching the sly thief. What were they going to do? Finally, the princess came up to the king, and she said, "Father, I think I can figure out who this thief is." "Well, how will you do that?" "By the sound of his voice." The sound of his voice. Yes, he spoke to me the first night that he was in my room. But not how he looks. No, it was dark. So then she begins to listen to everyone in the room with her eyes closed. And finally, it's the sly thief's turn, and he speaks. "Yes, that is him," she says. "Oh," says the king, "of course, we have you. But can you prove that I'm really the thief?" And the king thinks for a minute. "Well, you stole the treasure from my treasure room." "Well, how can you prove that?" said the thief. "Well, he couldn't." "Well, you have the mark on your forehead." "Well, he couldn't prove that either." "Well, you entered my daughter's room." He couldn't prove any of it. "And are you sure I am the one?" At that point, the princess was looking at this man, and she remembered his kind words. And she said, "I know it was you. And if you will admit that it was you, then I should like you to marry me." Well, the king looked at his daughter, and his daughter looked at her father and smiled. He knew it was time for her to wed, and she had chosen this person. And so he agreed. "If you admit that you are the sly thief, you may have my daughter's hand in marriage, and I will let you have this castle. But you must promise to never steal again." And so it was. He admitted that he was indeed the thief, and he received the king's daughter in marriage and the king's home. And of course, he had the wealth. So he had achieved his three ambitions in life: to be as rich as the king, to marry the king's daughter, and to have a house as grand as his. And he decided he would never steal again, which he held true, except for once a year. And that is called taxes. All right. That is the end of that story. It's been a long time since I've told that. And what a doozy. Okay. I don't know. I haven't been tracking my time, but I want to thank you for listening to me tell stories through Zoom. It's been nice to see your reactions, those of you in Zoom land on the top of my screen. That's very nice. And I will turn it back to the rest of the meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. More applause. We really enjoyed your stories, and Jean Marie, I wonder where she is today.
Yeah. Well, actually, I have an epilogue if you want.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Do
got
you? Okay. Well, I still live in the same house.
Oh,
And I still have the same landlord, and he and his wife are still friends with Jean Marie. And she is living in Minnesota, and she has 3 children now, and she's very happily married and thriving and doing well. So that's cool.
Thanks. So what about the thief? What came with him? That's for another
So-
time.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you so much for enduring and sharing your stories with us. They were absolutely delightful, and we lost absolutely nothing in the translation via Zoom. Watching you was a delight and a pleasure. So thanks, and it's a real testament to your skills and the like. So what I'd like to do is we need to take a break, and let's take a 5-minute break. Let me check the official time here. It's 6:57, so we can come back at 7:03.
all right.
7:03, we'll start up again. If there's anybody out in Zoom land that would like to tell a story, if you could speak up now and or send a message via the chat box there, we'll work you into the rotation. So 7:03, see you in a bit.
How are you? Yeah.